Thank you for being here. I came here last year, so I already know some of you. And I will present myself, Mariabruna Fabrizi. I am an architect, and I work also as a curator, and I teach here in Paris, in Paris Est. And last time I came to the school, I talked to you about mostly my practice, so the way some different projects are connected together. And this year we'll talk to you more about my current research. And I will try not to make it too long, and so that maybe we can have a little bit of time to discuss about it. I hope. I know you will have soon your final presentation, so you may be tired, and maybe it's also a way to talk, to think about something else. Sometimes it's good to take your head out of the project and go to something else. So this research is currently called the construction of imagination, which means for me many different things. I am interested in what imagination is, and what is architectural imagination, and especially how it is developed, how it is constructed. I like to use the term constructed. Really, can we think about imagination as a project? And can we really imagine that it's not just a faculty of the mind as it is, but something which we can develop, conduct? So can we really construct imagination? I started to work on this, on this subject, keeping in mind that we are, can you see? Yeah. That we are in this condition. I think this installation pretty much explains it. It's an installation by Eric Kessel, a contemporary artist. He makes this in many different settings. It's called 24 Hours in Photos. What he does is that he takes all the pictures which are uploaded on a social network, like maybe Instagram or Flickr or one of that, in 24 hours, and then prints all of them out, and then fills the space of a gallery or maybe the space of a room in a museum. And I think it summarizes pretty well visually what is going on in this moment compared to in relationship with the matter of visual culture. We are submerged by images, so this is just a little part of the images which are produced every day and uploaded every day, because also there are many which are produced without us even knowing. Images which are produced by machines, images which are produced by security camera, IRM scans. Every day there are more and more which are produced. And it looks a little bit like that, no? Like an ocean where we can easily draw. So starting from this experience, this situation, this condition where we all are based somehow at the moment, many years ago now, when I was still studying at the university, with my partner, we started a website because we were thinking, but can we make something good out of this condition? Everybody's complaining, but this is also a great opportunity we have. Nowadays, we have this incredible access to images from all over the world, from different kinds of history, from different segments of reality. How can we avoid to draw, to just be submerged by these images? And the question was, can we start from images to work on imagination? So I work since many years on this website, which is called SOC Studio. And this is a part of it, which is we call the Visual Atlas. So we figured out if we have this ocean, this territory where we can get lost, what could be a tool to somehow find some orientation. And an atlas is a form of cartography, so it's a way to somehow navigate through it. So we upload pictures we like, images we like, we are interested in, and we do in order to understand what's behind the images all the time. and also to start to connect images among them. So as you can see in the atlas, you can start to make your own connections, and you can start to find the path through these images. It works for us, but it works also for the people who see the website, who navigate through the atlas. So we started to understand that there was this kind of connection in between images and imagination, and the subtitle we gave to the website is this. So it's a non-linear journey through distant territories of human imagination. So again, this idea of journey, of moving through something made by images, the idea that you can have territories, and that you can make a trip which is non-linear. So you are not obliged to follow a line, but you can move through it. And then after years working on this project, I decided that I wanted to go a little bit deeper in these questions. How is imagination constructed? How do images construct imagination? I wanted to make a sort of scientific study about it. And I started my PhD on this subject, and which finished just recently, less than 1 year ago. And then this research, which is compressed in the PhD, it's then used for many other, to enrich many other articles, other kind of research books and projects. I will try to now let you navigate through this research. Let's make it not too long and complex. I will try to keep it, let's say, accessible and especially interesting for what you are doing, for producing projects in architectural projects. So I started, the work is divided, let's say, in 4 parts. And the first part, I was interested in defining imagination. And then all of it's a work which is symmetrical. We have a collective part, so there's a part which is for every project somehow collective, you can find in many parts of the year. There's one part which is more personal, and then I will talk about the spatialization of imagination. So there's some correspondences in between the different part of this research. So first, when I started, first things I wanted to do, I'll try to talk a little bit also about methods behind. So why do you start a research and how do they do it? I wanted to go as far as I could from architecture. I want to really leave it behind, to start with new eyes and to see if I could really not work with my methods, with my discipline. So no architecture, no history of art, there's no visual culture. And I started through philosophy on one side. So what is imagination for philosophy? And cognitive science on the other side. It was really for me a way to somehow start fresh again. And if you start, and imagination, it's something, if you think about it, everybody knows what it is. But when you start to define, it's not that easy. Where does it come from? How it is constructed? And the first philosopher who talked about imagination was Aristotle in the Anima. And he says that he gives a definition which nowadays almost correct, we could say. We start from images. All of us, we see images all the time through perception. So all your life, every day, you are collecting images. Not just the images in the media, not just the photograph, but just in your real life. Like now, each of us is looking at something and you are accumulating images. And these images, they are taken through perception, they are stored in memory. And then what imagination does is it connects them in new ways. It selects them, it collects, and then you make new content out of it. If you're doing your project at this moment, your final project, this is what you are doing. You are never starting from scratch. You're starting from something which you saw, something which you studied, something which you absorbed, which then you are recombining through your brain. This is what imagination does in new ways, which make it new. It make it something new. So it's an incredible capacity of the mind. So then Aristotle starts, is interested in imagination, he calls fantasia. And then philosophy it starts to consider imagination like something negative. For many years, starting this time with Plato, there is a tradition which considers imagination something which is fake, which is not deep, so there is a big philosophical tradition which just talks against imagination, more for ideas, for rationality. For Plato's the most important real thing are the ideas, and all their representation are just something which is not interesting anymore. So images and imagination for a long time are just out of any interest. And then we have to go back. We have to go to get to Kant to give again importance to imagination, saying that imagination is one of the most important capacity of human beings. And these I will not read through them. Don't worry, just keep them there. So the philosophers which were more important for me were mostly then in the 20th century, and especially Paul Ricoeur. So a French philosopher who is starting from phenomenology and hermeneutics. And he starts to say imagination is a capacity to find patterns, to find and to understand things which exist, and from that produce new meaning. And very important for me was also the first definition it's not anymore in philosophy, but it's in cognitive science. Mark Johnson is a contemporary cognitive scientist, so he tries to really understand how our brain, our mind works, and he says that imagination is one of the highest capacities that we have. But as you see, this is not what we imagine at first when we think about imagination. He talks about order, about organizing, giving new units, and for Mark Johnson, he retakes the tradition starting from Aristotle to Kant and says that imagination is giving some sort of scheme to the images we have in the mind, find a way to organize them. So I was moving very far. I won't go deeper into this, don't worry. No worries. I was moving far from architecture, from space, from image, and then all of a sudden I start to work on cognition, on cognitive science, and space just comes back. I wasn't expecting it. But what Mark Johnson says is that our capacity to imagine starts when we are very, very young, when we are his age, more or less, before we talk. So we talk and we just move. We already think. We don't have language. It doesn't mean that we don't think. We start to understand things just by moving in the reality which is around us. Basically, our cognition depends on the relationship we have with space when we are very young, really little. And that's so Mark Johnson, what he said is that, for example, from the experience of going from one point to another, just moving, we start to understand that we can put things on a line, on a path. For example, our experience of time. We talk about time and we imagine a line, which is something before us and something after us. And we connect things. So from our movement in space, we start to get these, which are called the image schemas. What Mark Johnson says in this long tradition is that we update somehow what Aristotle said. We have the images through perceptions, we store in memory, and then imagination puts these images on this scheme to organize them and produce new content. So I hope I haven't lost you on this, but that was for me a little bit shocking, because I say this, I didn't want to talk about space, I wanted to be in philosophy, in other things, and then space is just, what they say is that it's the beginning of all of it. So while working on this, I wanted to understand what was the construction of architectural imagination. I realized that imagination in itself is architectural. So our mind, our capacity of organizing things, of putting together images, depends on our experience of space. So you can imagine all of them. These are just a few of the image schemes, and these are just short representations I did. You work in cycle, because you go from one point to another, you are a little kid, and then you start to understand the cyclical events, for example. So all of that, center and periphery, you experience that there is something close to your body and something far, and then you can make a hierarchy of images in your mind. So this was the base, became the base of the work. And there are two paradigms which guided me through this research. One is the work by Aby Warburg. I talked about him also last time because it's always there. So, this art historian and historian from Germany who started to make this incredible project, which is the Atlas Mnemosyne, where he would just put pictures of many different movements in the history of art, but specifically from antiquity and the Renaissance, and making connection among them. Just moving the pictures on these different panels, they would produce new constellation of meanings. So they resonate with me with this idea of what imagination is. They put the images, you put them together, you store in memory, but the memory here is physical, and then they are recombined through different schemes. And this other project, which also somehow guided my research, is his own library in Hamburg. The library, so you also have the title Mnemosyne, which is memory. Aby Warburg, where there is this legend, probably it's true, when he was young, he renounced to all his rights as a firstborn son. He gave all of it to his second brother, to his brother. His family was very rich, but he asked in exchange to have the possibility to buy all the books he wanted in his life. He was accepted, so all his life he just filled this library with books. And when he said that when he was very young, he started to study, and he was very frustrated by the way libraries worked, because he wanted to talk about art, but he needed to talk about psychology, to study anthropology, to study history, and they were all in different libraries. And he thought that this couldn't work, that that's not the way for him knowledge works. So he puts all the different fields of studies interested in this library, and the way they are organized is through a rule which he calls the good neighbor. So you don't have chronological order, you don't have taxonometric, how would you say? But you just, one book would be close to another because they have something in common. They are good neighbors. And so through this, you enter the library, and the library is a maze of content which would just connect one another. So for me, the way the research of Aby Warburg worked was very important to develop my own. And it talked already about how imagination starts to become space. And another important, let's say, paradigm also which guided my research, which is the base of my research, is the method of Loci. So this is a kind of memory systems. Those are memotechniques, which are based on what they call the palace of memory. It's a way to memorize, things which exist since antiquity, where people would just imagine a space and put their memories into a space and then walk mentally through it to recombine things together. So the art of memory also makes a little bit the same things which Aby Warburg does. Puts together images, space, mind and space, mind and images. So these are all the ingredients which come back always in the research. And then, very important, it's also the way the different images in architecture are structured. I won't go in details by that, but of course, different kind of representation brings some meanings in itself through it. If you work in axonometrics or in plan or through photography, you will already give different cognitive meanings to what you are proposing. And so for the first part that was all about the definition of imagination. So now we know a little bit what it is. It's putting together images which we acquired, give them new meanings and connected them to the scheme. And then my question was, we are all human beings. We know the importance of identity, of diversity, but is there something common? Is there something which puts together the architectural imagination everywhere in the world? And I started to work also on this possibility that the image scheme I told you about, this cognitive structure, they can also become architectural structure. So my thesis is that the type has a cognitive origin. So I will just give you a very fast example. For example, this is the image scheme of containment. So when we are, again, a little kid, we learn that we can eat, for example, and having something inside of us, and the rest of the world is outside. So our cognition comes through the motion of our body. We start to define the fact that there are inside and outside. From this idea of inside and outside, we start to understand categories. So how do we organize things, putting them inside and outside categories? But in reality, if we work with space, containment means that we have an inside and outside. So the scheme of containment becomes the archetype of the enclosure. So if we start from this very abstract system, cognitive system, which is the scheme, then it somehow, when we go to place it more in a concrete reality, it becomes an archetype. And it moves, when we go closer to reality, to the idea of the patio, for example, in type. So we have always this movement from cognition, one scheme, which becomes an archetype with a series of images which exist everywhere, so in time and in space, and then they become a type. And the same thing we could do, for example, with the image scheme of verticality. I'm making very basic examples, but you can imagine that could be a much larger study. We're actually working on a book where the schemes become ways of producing projects. So from verticality, you can have the archetype of the Tower or the Tower of Babel, and the type of the skyscraper, for example. So as I was telling, we move from the definition, and in the first parts of the first part of this thesis and of this research, I try to understand how imagination comes from space. You experience space, and space is internalized. And then this space internalized starts to become this basic structure. But we have then a second movement, which goes from mind to space. We starting from space to mind, and then we go from mind to space. And this, we saw the way the architecture has some common collective basis, but there are also very, let's say, personal, individual ways of materializing imagination. And that was the part I was talking to you about at first when I was saying, can we conduct imagination? Can we construct our imagination? So again, I started working with cognitive science, and another theory which is very close to the one I was talking to you before by Mark Johnson is that of the extended mind, which was started by Andy Clark and David Chalmers. They are a philosopher, Andy Clark, and David Chalmers is a cognitive scientist, and they started with this short paper which is called The Extended Mind. What they said is that basically our mind is not confined to the brain. Our faculties are not just neurological. We think, we understand things, and we imagine. So I'm always interested more in this kind of the imagination, thanks to our relationship with the world around us, with the tools, with space, with everything which is around. So the mind, it's something which extends in reality. They make a very simple and clear example, which is two characters who have to go to the MoMA. and one has Alzheimer. And so one knows the path to arrive to MoMA in her mind, and the other one needs a notebook, writes down the instruction to get there through a notebook. And this notebook becomes the extended mind. So all of a sudden, the memory is not just stored in the brain, but is stored in an object. So I was wondering, can we use it for architecture? If imagination is made by the images, and these images enter our memories, can we exteriorize them? So what I did is that, and what I'm still doing, it's all in progress somehow. I'm interested in how the different architects exteriorize their memory and their imagination. I will just show you a few examples. And this also became a pedagogical tool. With my students, we work on the construction of personal atlases. So they collect images, they put the images together, they put them in relationship a little bit like the Abu Warburg Atlas I showed you before. And so it becomes their own exteriorized imagination. One very interesting, of course, and very famous example is this by the collection of postcards by Collas and Nedlund Wissendorf when they were in New York. They both haven't lived in New York before, so they made a sort of fake memory. They collected all the postcards. They became obsessed with this idea of having postcards with memories of the cities, with buildings, with parks. It's an incredible, it's a huge and complex collection. So they sort of made an exteriorized memory of a city they didn't know. And so for me, this image represents really this exteriorization of memory. And then this memory becomes imagination, because as you know, these images are included in Delirious New York. So most of the images in the book are taken from this research, and then in the work by Collas, the first ideas of the early skyscrapers of the city become the starting point of OMA projects. And I will go fast, and I will not show all of them, but a big part of this research is understanding how different architects collect images and how these images then resonate in their work. So what I usually do is I start from the collection which is not physically organized. There are many others. There is a collection by Nervi, there is by Le Corbusier. It's really common. This is by Italian architect Giuseppe Pagano. It's his own pictures. He takes pictures of rural architecture in Italy, and then they become sort of archetypes for developing rational architecture. But there is the famous morphology city metaphors by Ungers, where these images, they start to get the configuration, a specific configuration on a book, which again for me is an image scheme that of balance. He puts together plans of cities with images taken mostly from nature in order to talk about the metaphorical capacity of these structures. And so I'd say, I will not say too much, just show you a few examples of how some architects exteriorize their imagination. And sometimes they did it also in collaboration. These are Nigel Anderson, photographer, and Eduardo Paolozzi, artist. They both work with the Smithsonian, and they were making a sort of common atlas. They would exchange pictures, put them together in order to construct a discourse. And then slowly we are again moving from images to space. So I say that space comes back all the time. So some of these architects, they don't just make collections of pictures, but they start to give to them a structure. They start to put them in space. For example, Aldo Rossi uses a cartography. So in La Città Analoga, you have at the same time the images in his mind, in his memory, the cities of his past, the cities he wished he could have visited, and his own projects. So it's here is a sort of cartography of memory and imagination coming together. And somehow also Colas has the need, together again with Madeleine Brissendorf, to put all the images in his mind in a specific structure, and again the structure of a city. And so all of these are case studies I started to collect. So I'm basically interested in how every architect collects images, puts them together, and how some of them, these three I'm showing you now, some of them also give a space to these images. They just invent a territory. For example, in this case of Lina Bobardi, she has these images in her mind coming from mythology most, and then she puts all together in a territory, which is a territory of imagination. This is a work by Giancarlo Durisch, puts them in a grid, together the images of in his mind and the project. And very famous, maybe is probably the architect I worked more on is Aldo van Eyck, because he was really obsessed by images, and he would really make this exercise we're talking about, constructing an atlas, putting images together, making them resonate, and then make them live to the project. He makes it very constantly. And this work, the Otterlo Circles, is his own synthesis. He really explains what he's doing. He takes these three examples, a temple, so it's the plan of the Parthenon, then an example of vernacular architecture in Utah, and then a famous example by Van Doesburg, the counter-construction, and they represent three moments in the history of architecture which he wants to put together. Three moments which seem impossible to be somehow synthesized, but then this is what he really does in his work. And then I move again slowly through space. Again, we have the images. The images were just collections. They become atlas, they become cartographies, they become cities. And then some people started to make atlases which can work in the 3D dimensions. So this is, you have now the big exhibition by Gerhard Richter in the Fondation Louis Vuitton, but you know that Richter worked with photos. He worked mostly of the time starting from picture, and he collected pictures throughout all his life and put them together to make this huge atlas, which is become then at a certain point a work of art in itself. And then he starts to put in three dimensions in museums. It became a work of art, an immersive work of art in itself. And same, now more than 10 years ago, Georges Didier Huberman with Arno Giesinger decided to do an immersive version, we could say, of the atlas by Aby Warburg. So instead of making just the pictures on a black background, he put videos in a whole huge space in Palais de Tokyo. So all of a sudden you could move through the atlas. So for me, this example helped us going through the last chapters of this research, which is that we started from space. Space is internalized when we are young kids, and it goes into our mind, and then it's somehow exteriorized through the images, and then the same images can become space again. Talk to you about how another of my references is the art of memory. And the art of memory took many different kinds of, let's say, materialization during history. This is, for example, the Towers of Wisdom. It's a way to memorize and to put in relationship concepts among them. But this concept takes the form of an architecture. So again, to put together logics and thoughts, we use an architecture. And for example, also some of the people who worked on the art of memory or developed it, they really started to make projects. So this is, for example, principle to construct a room of a palace of memory. It's an actual project. When you see it, we have the wall, first wall, second wall, rooms, we have grids, we have structure, but it's all mental. So it's not supposed to be a real architecture. It's supposed to be a mental architecture to put inside images you want to memorize. But it's an actual project. It's an actual architectural project. And so I finished this, this small lecture on the construction on imagination, describing you 4 projects when it really became a three-dimensional space. This idea of putting images all together into in relationship with image scheme. So I analyzed a series of projects trying to understand if you can really find this cognitive nature inside some spaces. So I have again the Kulturwissenschaftliche Bibliothek by Abi Warburg, where you find this logic I told you about of the good neighbor, so moving from one book to another just as a connection of ideas, which becomes a connection of paths. But you also have this central elliptic space, which talk about this idea of center and periphery, with the more important books close to the center, and then the more specialized going to the periphery. So a way against to materialize space. For me, these are all architecture, which are cognitive architecture, let's say. Another example, which was also built, is the Outlook Tower by Patrick Geddes. So mostly is a geographer who produced this. It took an ancient tower, Outlook Tower in Edinburgh, and transformed it in a museum. But it's based on the vertical scheme I was talking before about. So you would start from the top, and you would look around the reality, the perception. So the reality of Edinburgh around you. Then you would look at it from a camera obscura, the projection of the perspective, and then you will go down in each stage. From the subject would be Edinburgh, Scotland, English-speaking countries, Europe, and then the world. So you would start from the local and get to the global. And cognitively, you would just cross each stage, moving from one point to another, from one story to another. And then this is another example is the Cellula Mundanium by Paul Otlet. Again, some of these all of these for me are architectural projects, but they were not made by architects. They were made by a geographer and historian. Paul Otlet is difficult to define who he was, because he was a sort of polymath, almost like a Renaissance one, but very interested all his life in the idea of categorization of information. Before the internet, we are in 1936, he imagined a building where you could have access to all human knowledge. It's a sort of Wikipedia made as a building. It was never built, he could never do it, but imagined it and made many sketches for many years. So you would start from this octagonal cellule and then move through other space, following always this idea of knowledge. And I finish on one of my favorite projects ever. So you are now in Paris, but of course, you know, the House Museum by Johnson, which makes a little bit for me the synthesis of all of it. It's really Son spent all his life going to see architecture in one-to-one, the real through his grand tour, but he always wanted to keep these memories, these famous memories we're talking about. He wanted to materialize them and then to reproduce and to assemble in new ways, as imagination would do. And what he did, which goes even further, is that he constructed his own house and changed the configuration of his house, also following the possibility of new imaginations, new paths which you could conduct inside. And this leads us to be that we could move from the art of memory, the famous art of memory, to an art of imagination. So a way of conceiving architecture, following the cognitive paths, and putting together images in order to give them new meaning and construct new projects. And that's, thank you.